Hello and welcome to another episode of Deprogrammed. I am your host, Keri Smith, and I'm here with a special guest today. We're going to be talking about nutrition, holistic health. My guest is Jennifer Atkins. She is a poet, a mother, a wife, a holistic health practitioner, an herbalist, and you may know her from the chat. Please welcome Jennifer. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello, Carrie.
I wrote down in the notes how I was gonna introduce you, and then it disappeared. So, did I leave anything out?
Oh, no, you covered the important parts. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I would like to start by asking you thank you, first of all, for being here today, and,
Thank you for responding.
yeah, thanks for sharing your time, your expertise. I don't know a lot about this topic, so I'm excited to speak with you because my husband and I have been learning more about seed oils and trying to limit seed oils, not just in cooking, which we had been doing for a while already, but in some of the processed foods that we buy or breads and chips and things like that we buy. And then we've also been learning more now that uh, my husband has started baking a lot, and he's very interested in flour, making our own flour, and then learning more about the process by which flour is mass produced in the US. And so I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
And can we just start with you telling me a little bit about what is a holistic health practitioner and a little bit about your background?
Okay. Well, uh, a lot of different modalities can be holistic. You can be an herbalist and actually not be holistic. Some have managed to do that. But you can be an MD and be holistic. You can be an herbalist and be holistic. It's what that means is you're looking at the whole environment, the whole system. You're looking at physical, emotional, mental, spiritual health, the effects of the environment, the effects of lifestyle. So I consider it looking at individuals as an ecology, just as the ecology has many different dynamic components within it, creating balance with and from all those components. We ourselves are an ecology, and uh, including our microbiome, that we have an ecology within us, and our physical health can affect our emotional state. Our emotional state can affect our physical health. And
Mhm.
there are many, of the older healing traditions incorporated this into their practice. Whether it was, traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, for instance, talking about chi or prana, the energetic principles, and how you might consider that like the channel by which the interaction might happen. But a holistic practitioner considers all these things in a big picture um, perspective. And I mentioned I was watching Brett and Heather earlier today, and I would consider them holistic practitioners because they look at complex systems and they understand how the change of a small element in an ecosystem can cause a change to the whole system. So it's understanding the dynamics uh, both within and without, and also it scales up fractally, where you can look uh, down in scale,
Mhm.
uh, and it'll be the same kind of dynamic. You can scale up, and it'll be the same kind of dynamic. So just as you see fractals in all different scales in nature, we have that within ourselves as well.
When you say scale down or scale up and you see the same thing, can you give me an example of what you're talking about there?
Well, whether you're looking at a cellular level or organ systems or ourselves within the environment. So um, it's it's similar dynamics where we live on the earth. You could consider us cells of the earth. If the earth were an organism, we could be seen as individual cells on the earth. Uh, you could look at, our own organs as components of an ecology, we being the ecology.
Mhm.
So it's understanding systems, they work the same way, and you can apply holistic principles to pretty much everything, whether it's business or urban planning or marketing. It can apply to any practice.
Okay. And to be clear for any new folks listening, when you said you were listening to Brett and Heather earlier, you meant Brett
Dark Horse,
Weinstein.
Dark Horse podcast, yes.
Yes. Yes. Um, can you can you tell me a little bit about something specific that we've been, like I said, reading a lot about here in our home, and I've seen a lot of people talking about online, and so it seems that hopefully it's a topic other people are interested in. What is the problem with seed oils, or why are people suddenly talking about seed oils?
Well, generally, I think the topic would be having to do with the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio.
Hmm.
And those are going to be like uh, omega-3s will have different, there are different uh, fatty acids that are a component of omega-3s, for instance, DHA and EPA, alpha-linolenic acid is converted to those. Omega-6s, there are different fatty acids that make up those categories. And they each have their use. Omega-6s tend to be more pro-inflammatory. Omega-3s tend to be more anti-inflammatory. And we do need inflammation, it's part of the healing process. But when we have too much of something that is pro inflammatory, that tends to create a constant state of inflammation in the system. And most of us have too much exposure to pro inflammatory things. And uh, ancestrally, our ratio of omega 3s to omega 6s was anywhere from 1 to 1 to 3 to 1 omega 6 to omega 3. And now it might be, I think it's like 17 times the omega 6 to omega 3. So
Wow.
yeah, it's not near the balance that is ideal for uh, a good state of health.
Well, when we started looking into this, it makes sense to me that we're seeing it, so much higher now, like 17 to 1, when we started looking at the ingredients. So, when we started reading about seed oils, we said, okay, we're just going to use, olive oils and coconut oils and avocado oils. And I had already cut out for cooking, I'd already learned about why I shouldn't be using vegetable oil and um, canola oil and those kind of things. So I wasn't cooking with them, and I thought that's good enough. But then we started recently looking at ingredients on chips, bread, um, all different kinds of food, processed foods at the store. And sure enough, in a lot of the things we had never really looked at before, I'd see these things listed very high up, meaning that a high amount of, canola oil or vegetable oil or something in the ingredients.
Sunflower, cottonseed oil, yeah, what have you. And, it's not like a particular oil is only, like omega-6, like canola oil does have some omega-3, but part of the problem with that is, so you have saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, extra polyunsaturated. So a saturated would be something like coconut oil or butter. A monounsaturated would be avocado, olive oil, and then the polyunsaturates are the seed oils, the what people are usually referring to. So that's going to be like the sunflower and the canola, safflower. Those are going to be more the polyunsaturated. What that means is that um, in simple terms, the saturated fats are less vulnerable to oxidation. And as you become less saturated, it becomes more vulnerable to oxidation. That's, a simple way of just describing what's going on is that the saturated fats are very stable. And so exposure to light, to heat, to oxygen, those are not going to degrade it as readily.
Mhm.
So it can be stable uh, in a less stable environment. But then you have something like canola oil, when it's exposed to light, when it's exposed to oxygen, it begins to oxidize. And then you start to be, it is more likely to form free radicals in the body. And that's going to cause oxidative stress. So that's, and hence some of the inflammation.
Mm.
So, and then you have something like flax oil, and think of how flax oil is handled. It's kept cool. It's in a dark bottle. You keep it tightly sealed with flax seed. You don't want to, if you have the ground flax seed, you want to keep it, well sealed and cool, because once it's ground, it becomes exposed to air and can begin to oxidize. Flax oil, you don't cook with it because heat begins to degrade it. Light degrades it, and so forth. So think of how carefully you can handle flax oil, or you need to handle flax oil because it is very prone to oxidation. It's an extra long chain fatty acid. So it has more uh, places on the molecule that are vulnerable to oxidation.
Mm.
And so if that's how you handle flax oil, well, canola oil, I mentioned, also has omega 3s. If it has omega 3s and you're using it for cooking, you're exposing it to heat, what's happening to those omega 3s that are in the canola oil? Those are rapidly degrading. And, I marketing is quite a thing.
Yes.
I I remember seeing a label on one of, this was a while back, but I saw a label on one of the bottles of canola oil that said high in omega 3, great for high heat cooking. And I'm like, hmm, because that's what you don't do to omega 3s. Like whoever put that on the label doesn't really know their nutrition very well,
Or
because,
they know and they're counting on the consumer not knowing.
well, and that's why education is such an important thing. And uh, my family owned a health store for over 30 years, and that's where I spent over 15 years there doing customer service. And so I worked in a venue that was both retail, and we're not a clinic. We don't give medical advice, but we worked with a lot of people who were dealing with health issues. And health stores really require having staff that are trained, that have a health background, because we're going to be dealing with customers that have health issues and have questions. We also need to be able to understand nutrition and be able to vet products, because this is a whole topic right here,
Mhm.
talking about health stores. But uh, I can get more into that. But anyway, customer education is very important. And since the 90s, we've been, I don't know if you recall, but it was late 90s when you started hearing more about, oh, coconut oil is actually good for you, and butter and egg yolks, these are actually good. Well, that's one of the things we were really trying to educate people about. I remember by the late 90s, we were really trying to get people to understand that saturated fat was not the problem. You need your egg
Yes.
yolks, you need your butter. Those are good for you. Those are brain food. Those are needed by your cells. The fatty acids that are there.
I think a lot of that you got people who were trying to get that message out there that, butter is actually good for you. You had to counteract everything that had happened in the 70s and 80s. You know, growing up in the 80s, there I just recall from anecdotally from my childhood, there was this big sort of butter's fattening, and you should use margarine, and you should use I
Yeah,
can't believe it's not butter.
yeah. And, that, I mean, when I was first doing that, I had people tell me, you're going to kill people with heart disease. You're telling people to eat butter. And I'm like, do you understand how the body works a bit? You have to give a little pushback to some things. And, you know, this was also the kind of pushback against the mainstream um, wisdom of
Hmm.
the time was that, saturated fat is bad. But if you had definitely more holistic training, but to me, it's like if you trained just in physiology and understood how the body works, there are a lot of things that were done in the medical arena that didn't seem to me very well based in actually how the body works. And this is anything from, what kind of nutrition the body actually needs to, um, like, for instance, there were so many people that we worked with almost daily who came in for, arthritic conditions, deteriorative conditions. They would be coming in looking for, something for joint pain. And my first question for them would be, how is your digestion? And do you have any digestive issues? Have you been taking acid blockers? Usually I wouldn't get to that. I would just let them tell me first, what their digestive state was. But if they would often say, oh, my digestion's fine, no big deal, I would keep questioning them on it a bit. And uh, I would sometimes have to ask them, are you on anything like acid blockers, dealing with reflux? And they'd be like, oh, yeah, I've been taking acid blockers for, 20 years. And the reason I ask this question, if someone comes in for something like arthritis, is because it's like, well, how do you think your body repairs joint tissue? You need to have stomach acid in order to absorb proteins and minerals. So if you don't have the stomach acid, you're eventually going to run out of what you need to repair connective tissue, all your connective tissue. Um, and people were under the impression that they had an excess of acid, too much stomach acid, when in the case usually was that they had an insufficiency. And, not to get too much into the health details of that, um, reflux can be a result of this upper sphincter muscle is triggered to close partly by the presence of acid. Like if you are having a meal and there's food in the stomach, then your body's like, okay, start producing the acid. We need to digest. And the presence of the acid triggers that upper sphincter muscle to close. Well, if there's just a trace of acid, that it may not get that signal to close, and even a trace amount of acid will burn the esophagus. It's not meant for that. But you need more than a trace of acid to digest properly. So people would be taking acid blockers because they didn't want to deal with the reflux issues, but no one had ever mentioned that, well, you actually have an insufficiency. You need to build your digestive secretions to make sure that upper sphincter muscle closes properly. And they also weren't told they weren't told that acid blockers are for short-term use only. When you stay on them long term, and there are warnings on the packaging that it's for short-term use. Long-term use can lead to nutrient deficiencies, B12, other vitamin deficiencies, um, and also kidney and heart issues from long-term use, because again, you're interfering with nutrient absorption. So, and this was something no one had ever told them. They had been seeing a physician for years, and none of them had ever explained this.
Yeah.
And it also hadn't occurred to them that, oh, my patients have arthritis now that they've been on acid blockers for a long time. And if you've been in the intensive training that physicians get, where you really study physiology, and wouldn't you know that the acid is needed for proper nutrient absorption? And that's just one of the many questions I would have of the some of the mainstream, you know, narrative about health.
Some of the mainstream narrative to me seems to be upside down and more geared towards prescribing things to deal with symptoms without trying to prevent things from happening, and also without regard for, when you're prescribing things, sometimes the adverse effects that then they'll prescribe more things for. I just know this through experience with friends and family who might be on, one drug for this symptom, and then that causes them to need another drug for this symptom, which causes them to need another drug for this symptom. And it's like, this just seems like it might be upside down how
Well,
this is functioning.
and that gets back to the holistic philosophy, which is, okay, you've done something. What are the effects of that? Also, there's getting to the root issue. That
Right.
is part of holistic philosophy. It's like, okay, you're looking at a symptom pattern, you're looking at what a person is experiencing, but the question is always, what is the root issue? It's not this symptom or that symptom. It's like, what's causing all these symptoms? You look for the root issue. And that applies also to, whether it's mental health, uh, physical health, that applies to, again, you can apply that socially. What is the root issue going on here? And that's always what you have to look for, because you can keep chasing symptoms, but you're not going to solve the problem. And so uh,
That
I saw a lot of missing that key step. What is the root issue?
that's an interesting when you say socially. I'm going to ask you what may sound like a bit of a funny question, but here at Deprogrammed, I talk about a lot of the chaos in the world, the dystopia we find ourselves in, through the lens of ideology, through the lens of looking at specifically my old belief system and trying to take apart the belief system and the different ideas within it, and how that has impacted culture and society, and some of the what I would describe as madness that we see playing out around us socially. Um, but I suspect that you could also look at the madness or the chaos in society or in culture from this uh, physiological perspective. Maybe I know people who look at it through a psychological lens. My friend Josh Slocum, he does the Disaffected podcast, looks at it
Oh, yes. That's actually, I've been to his podcast, and I quickly found yours and Benjamin's and several others. And I was like, I was so happy when I found Deprogrammed. I was like, Josh is channeling my inner gay man. My
oh,
goodness.
yes. he's He does a great job of tackling it through the psychological lens.
Yeah.
I more often sometimes we'll talk about the psychological, more often look at it through the ideological lens. But so I think that you could also look at it through this health lens, mental and emotional health, and physical health. And do you think that like if the building block of society, as I see it, is probably the family, and the building block of a family is the individual. And if you have a society where a lot of individuals are sick, are unhealthy, that can't be helping. So, do you have any thoughts about, I know this is kind of a weird question, but do you think that physical health and nutrition plays into anything that we're seeing
Oh,
play
yeah.
out?
And again, that's kind of that fractal system, like we're, all components of society. Just like if you have cells that aren't functioning properly, that might lead to cancer or something. But it's the same kind of dynamic. And if you have a lot of endocrine disruptors in the environment that are impacting, uh, your hormonal status, and that can be chemicals that mimic estrogen, that can be chemicals that interfere with um, the transport of thyroid hormones. It could be chemicals that inhibit the functioning of your beneficial flora, the microbiome. And Dr. Stephanie Seneff is someone really good for reference on that. And she has spoken with Moms Across America.
Okay.
But Dr. Stephanie Seneff, she's a really good resource for information on the microbiome and some of the contaminants in the environment, and how those play out, and uh, how chemicals can, for instance, congest the liver, and the liver being responsible for a lot of detoxification processes. If it has, for instance, just as an example, uh, an overexposure to chemicals and it can't process all efficiently, and there starts to be a backlog of something like estrogen, well, that's something that can affect mood. Just to simplify it, not all the things it can affect, just that'll affect mood. Uh, Excessive estrogen dominance can interfere with uh, thyroid activity. So it's not necessarily that your body isn't producing enough thyroid hormone, it's that it's not able to get into the active form or get uh, transported properly. So then you start dealing with, thyroid issues, and that affects mood. Your gut flora convert or create a lot of your neurotransmitters. So if your gut flora is out of balance, then that can impact mood. Maybe you're stressed out by the news. Well, that can downregulate immune function or some of your metabolic processes. So then, your emotional state can then impact your organ health. So there's that. Oh gosh, there was a point you were mentioning about.
Just about if you have a society where a lot of individuals are not functioning at their healthiest, can that lead to some of um, the sort of excesses of emotion, of violence, of things that we're sort of seeing play out around us in the world? Like I know we've all, if you're online as much as I am, you see um, more videos today of people losing it in public than I've ever seen. Now, part of that is just a function of us now having all carrying cameras with us, but I also suspect that it's actually quantitatively there are more instances of that happening, of people just being emotionally dysregulated.
There is that, but one of the root issues, I would say, and this is from a collection of factors, is going to be lack of character development. Uh,
Mhm.
so where does that come from? And yeah, Josh uh, on Disaffected talks about that, is the cluster B
Mhm.
um, behavior of a lot of society right now. And cluster B uh, pathology could be described as a lack of or insufficient development of character. It's a deficiency or lack of conscience.
Yes.
And there are the different ways that can manifest, but that um, character pathology, that is how we used to, before I knew those terms, I would just describe that as, that's bullying, that's predatory behavior, that's manipulative behavior, and now we're learning some of the language for what that actually is.
Mhm.
But that behavior has been around a long time, and that what a predator, what a bully likes to do, they don't want to be seen. They don't want people to know what they're trying to get away with. So they want to condition people. They want to condition people to enable their behavior. They don't want people to call them out. And the conditioning is what I have seen. That to me is what a lot of woke is.
Mhm.
Is those are the bullies and their enablers, and then a lot of people who, are just, I don't necessarily want to say naive, but sometimes it is that. It's when you have people who are very sincere and conscientious, and want to believe the best of those around them. It's easy to give people the benefit of the doubt and to think the best of a situation, unless you know what a cluster B kind of personality is.
Right.
Unless you've met someone like that and had to interact, um, you don't know what to be on guard for. There are a lot of red flags that people really, I'm hoping this era is about learning to recognize that pathology, because I think that is the root of a lot of what we see going on.
I completely agree, and I guess I appreciate this because I also I think we can take it apart from that psychological lens as well. I guess I was just more of asking is do you see any nutritional or health or are we is part of it also that we are sicker as a society maybe because we're physically not as well, or
Yeah,
is that crazy talk?
no, no, no. It's both. Again, you can't
Yeah,
just
look at
talk
it one way.
in one
Yeah.
direction only. Yeah, it goes both ways. So, but if your physical health is not great, you're less resilient, and you know, are going to be more likely to just be tired, have brain fog, not think clearly, not have it's like, oh, I just don't want to hear about this. I don't want to deal with this, and just want to put it off instead of dealing with an issue that really needs
Yeah.
addressing. Because, physically, you might just be, not in the best of health. And um, yeah, because of the chemicals we're exposed to. Not a lot of people are nutrient deficient, and that might be, B vitamins, that might be minerals, that might be our omega 3s. Uh, Vitamin D status is not that great. Basic minerals like magnesium and zinc, um, because of poor digestion or uh, gut flora status, we're not, our B vitamin levels may not be ideal. Something about the vitamin D also is a lot of the drugs that are prescribed for cholesterol. Well, how do you make vitamin D? You make it from cholesterol. So if if you have a large portion of the population that are on cholesterol lowering medications, and again, why? Um, that can impair your production of vitamin D, because you don't have enough cholesterol to make your sex hormones, to make vitamin D. It's uh, a repair component. It's brain matter. Also,
Ye
that can create some of the cognitive impairment.
That's so interesting because I just had I just met up with a friend today who's also kind of in a similar field as you, and she was blowing my mind the way that you are, and one of the things she said was what you just said about now let me I don't want to get if I get it wrong, correct me. She said something about if you have a cholesterol deficiency that it can affect your sex hormones. Your body will start effectively like eating your sex hormones. Maybe I'm getting it wrong, but she was like, this could be contributing to so many people feeling, well, I don't feel very like women
It's
having
a drug, and
an increase in testosterone or men having an increase of estrogen because their body is actually lacking in cholesterol. Is that right?
well, that's what you make your testosterone and estrogen. Your sex hormones are made from cholesterol. Vitamin D is both a vitamin and a hormone, and it is made from cholesterol.
Okay.
So if you don't have enough cholesterol, you may not be able to make all the hormones you need, all the vitamin D you need. And again, why was the focus on lowering cholesterol in the first place? Well, it was blamed for cardiovascular disease.
Mhm.
But understanding that the inflammation is the issue, The blood vessels can become inflamed, and that can be from, for instance, elevated blood sugar can irritate the blood vessel lining. Well, to help, cover the irritated lining, your body might put down a layer of cholesterol so that the blood can flow uh, and without um, irritating the blood vessel lining, basically. And the cholesterol is not supposed to be there building up in the lining, though it's not supposed to be inflamed in the first place. But um, if the inflammation doesn't go away, that can keep building up and building up. And the problem isn't the cholesterol. The problem is, why is the blood vessel inflamed? So that's, are there enough carotenoids in the system to help protect the blood vessel lining? Or is the omega-3 status? What's your blood sugar? Are a lot of people are dealing with metabolic syndrome with elevated blood sugar levels. But the problem isn't the cholesterol. And then cholesterol itself has different types. The HDL and LDL, and some molecules of cholesterol are more vulnerable to oxidation, which makes it sticky, and that makes it even more likely to congest the blood vessels. Well, the problem again is not the cholesterol, it's why is it more prone to oxidation? Why is it producing more of that type? So, you know, in blood panels, there are specific markers that you can look for to see what your inflammatory status is. Like you can look at the LPA levels, C-reactive protein, homocysteine. Homocystine's usually a big marker for inflammation, also of nutrient deficiencies, because elevated homocysteine, for instance, can indicate B vitamin deficiency.
Okay. I'm taking probably more notes with you than any guest ever, just FYI.
And I'm still, I haven't done intensive customer service for a while, so I'm trying to remember. It's like, how did I used to say all this, But because this used to be daily for me, was doing this kind of just explanation for customers. Um,
What was
but
that like when people come into that, like, health store? Because you're not a doctor, and you're not allowed to give medical advice, but people are coming looking for health advice. What is that like, and what is the level of people's awareness about their own bodies, and because I feel like I knew nothing.
it really varies. I mean, some people, they don't know really much about nutrition or even their own physiology, which I think, should be taught from a very young age. You should be taught your anatomy and physiology, because the more educated you are, the less fooled you are able to be. The more you know how your body works, the less marketing works on you. I want to get back to marketing at some
Yes.
point. That's
Okay.
that's a big issue. Um, but we would also have very educated customers, especially if they'd been dealing with health issues for a long period. And they're like, I need to find out what's going on with me. And they would do their own research. And, or they might be in the health field themselves. But it, it varied. We had a very diverse customer base. So, but our role, because again, we don't give medical advice, what I would do is I might answer questions about what a product is. If people were looking for a particular nutrient or herb, I would try to guide them to what they were looking for. But I would also, if they had a particular issue, I would ask them what they knew about the issue. I would provide a little more information about the issue itself. Again, I'm not diagnosing, prescribing, I'm just describing what is going on with the issue. For instance, like the reflux, how reflux was usually a result of insufficient stomach acid. And
Right.
then I would talk about some of the consequences potentially for that. So it was mostly just describing, this, uh, describing what a nutrient might be, what the health issue a person was dealing with might entail, and you educate so that they can make their own decision. It is supposed to be empowering for the individual, We're
Hmm.
giving them the information so that they can make their own decision. Informed
Wait, you
consent.
mean you're not doing a mandate? I'm kidding.
No,
I'm
no, it's like,
joking.
you must take this. And I would let them know. It's like, you know, when you go to your physician, they're giving you information also. It's still your decision, you
Yeah,
know.
I'm being a little sarcastic there because of in the past few years how we um suddenly had a lot of people telling us that health mandates to do certain things and choose certain things was normal, and I was like, that wait, what's happening? Especially people who there were some people on the left, and I know I'd like to ask you about this. I know you mentioned this before we started.
Yeah,
But there I was a little shocked to see I did see some of my old school progressive friends who have been sort of, skeptical of big pharma for a long time and more into the holistic medicines, and they remained that way. They didn't let the, propaganda affect their position on, you know, mandates, uh, or let them they weren't swayed into this sort of one size fits all, "You
I
must
mean,
take
they
this."
stuck to their principles.
Some of them stuck to their principles, yes, but
Yeah,
then I
yeah.
saw it's amazing, but then I saw others who didn't, and I was shocked because I thought, "Wait, but you're a lefty and you've always been skeptical of big pharma, and now suddenly you're not, you're gung ho for." So,
Yeah.
did you see that happening in the health community? That in
Oh, yeah, I saw that, and I saw it kind of in different stages, because we had always been leery of big pharma because we understood marketing. Just in with what we did, a health store to me is a unique venue. It's kind of a hybrid of a grocery store and a clinic. We're not a clinic, but we have people coming in often with, serious health issues. And, you know, one has to be sensitive to that as well. You need to be very professional as a healthcare provider. Think of like in a pharmacy, the pharmacist isn't, taking the place of a doctor, but they have the health background and they can help guide the customer, through supplement choices or understanding their medications. And it's like an apothecary, like the old apothecaries. That's what a health store, I think, is supposed to be. And that means we really have to have trained staff with a solid background in uh, holistic health, ideally. And one of the things we do is we vet products. There shouldn't be products on the shelf that don't pass our standards. That's one of the things I started seeing being an issue was around Y2K. Um, we started kind of becoming mainstream. Holistic health, a lot of the products, supplements started becoming more mainstream. And it's like a lot of people kind of just relaxed and it's like, oh, we're popular now. We don't have to try so hard, is
Mm.
almost what it felt like a bit. Because what happened was the market, the market, uh, was like, hey, the health stores, natural products are a big market now. We can, take advantage of this market. But a lot of companies didn't know what the principles of holistic health and, what the philosophy was, you know. So the taking care of the soil, taking care of the ecology, um, it's I don't know if you're familiar with like Rudolf Steiner and the philosophy of biodynamic um,
I'm not.
horticulture.
Okay.
Uh, we could also talk about the different certifications. So anyway, we have to vet products. We have to know what our philosophy is. There are companies that have been doing this for a long time. If you want to know some of the companies that are really making sure that they're adhering to high quality standards, a couple of resources are the Organic Consumers Association,
Okay.
um, the Cornucopia Institute. They're the ones who do scorecards. They will review all these different brands, all these different products, and will rate them according to, um, if it's dairy, do they have their herds on grass? How much of their uh, feed, how much they're on pasture exclusively, what are their management practices, so forth. So they will review the company's standards and then give them a rating. And they do this for all different products and companies, but that's the Cornucopia Institute, and you can go to their scorecards.
Okay.
Um, Another one is Mamavation, just mama, like mom,
Mhm.
Mamavation. And they also do product reviews, and they had some recently for butter and salt. And like for butter, there's the product, like the organic standards, like is it grass-fed butter and is it clean? But there's also the wrapper around the butter, and sometimes the wrapper will have chemicals that leaches into the butter. So you might have a good butter, but the wrapper isn't so great.
Oh,
I mean, all these things. It gets complicated working in this field because you have to be staying on top of, what's this company's practices? Have they changed any of their practices? Those are all things we have to review. If a company is just trying to say, "Hey, this is part of the naturals market. Let's make our product like this," we'll, do the least uh, necessary to get organic certification because they're different levels. Actually, they're different certifiers. Um, so they'll do the least necessary to get organic certification, but they don't have any of the philosophy. And this is just with grocery products. With supplements, that is actually an area that is regulated, but the regulation is very sketchy.
mhm.
And ironically, it's actually the companies that are usually trying the hardest that have the most oversight. Um, there's a difference between a lot of the brands you might find at a regular retailer and the ones that used to be exclusive to health stores. There's a reason a lot of companies said, we're only going to sell our products in health stores because we want to make sure that there are trained people to help guide customers to the proper product. That means trained staff. And because they didn't want customers to misuse something, they didn't want them to get something that wasn't appropriate, and therefore they were disappointed in their results. They wanted people to be getting what was appropriate for them. They wanted to have the right standards. And a lot of the supplement companies are in FDA approved facilities. There are a lot of regulations that they go by, but then there are companies that are just like, oh, well, let's just bottle some herbs and put it on the shelf. And for whatever reason, the FDA doesn't always look at those companies as closely. Um, but when I hear people say, oh, it's an unregulated industry, that's not quite true.
Right.
And again, Organic Consumers Association and also the Alliance for Natural Health. Uh, the Alliance for Natural Health tends to focus more on the supplements and what's going on in different states according to, as far as like if there's maybe a state ban proposed on access to something. So they will be up to date on different legal issues, and then also review of studies, like for instance, on electromagnetic fields and things that might be involved with EMF radiation. Uh, and they will put out the studies, access to information on such things. So those are just some good resources. Um, but
I'm taking notes, and when you said Momavation and butter, I just did a quick search over here in the search bar, and I'm sad to announce for anyone who enjoyed Kerrygold brand like I do, that it has PFAs in the wrapper and has also been sued in Superior Court for packaging their products in contact wraps containing toxic PFAs, forever chemicals. That's disappointing. They have a list of good ones too, but,
yes, there's some that they have, I think, three categories, a list to try to avoid, some that are not so bad, and then there recommended. And there are some companies that, like I said, the butter itself is really good, but and a lot
Right.
of companies didn't realize that that was an issue with the packaging. So believe me, a lot of the companies that are really conscientious, they're going to be working on getting their packaging uh, redone.
Everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some of the companies that you might recommend or suggest. Let's see. I think the Strauss was one that had uh, good packaging review and is also organic. Truly grass fed, I think, was another that was on the clean packaging side.
Mm-hmm.
Vital Farms, trying to remember some of them. But
Yeah.
you can also go to the Alliance for Natural Health site and see what interesting topics they have there, or the cornucopia.
You're giving me a lot to to research later.
We
Well,
could do a whole series on a set of topics.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's touch a little bit more on ideology. As I mentioned here at Deprogram, I talk a lot about my old belief system and social
Mhm.
justice and woke, and a lot of
Oh,
people have woken up to this in the past few years. And for some people, their waking up moment was during the COVID policy years. And so, have you seen an intrusion of woke ideology into the health community?
yeah, why didn't the health community stand up more firmly against what was pretty clearly a scam from the start? Um, and in January of 2020, we were just beginning to hear about COVID. My husband and I both got it. Uh, we He came down with it in January, and I thought it was flu at first, and used my usual remedies. I have my herbal remedies I use for that, and that are usually very effective. But it was like, it's helping, but not as much as it should be. And I started doing a little research, and then I was like hearing about this new infection, and that was COVID. And I'm like, oh, okay, so there's something different going on. And I checked with some of um, the the people I learned from in the herbalist community to see what they had to say. And they already had protocols. There were some who, like, were practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine. They were already in contact with some of the practitioners in China, hearing what protocols had been put together
Mhm.
there that were effective. So kind of advanced practice with that population. And then, so putting together protocols here, not just with some of the Chinese herbs, but with equivalent herbs, or, putting together, other protocols for what's available here in the States. So they already had protocols together, and I switched over what I was doing, and it's like, oh, started resolving immediately. So, it sucked. It was, like flu for us, but there was more of the chest congestion that was stuck and was difficult to get up. So I switched protocols for that, and it's like, oh, yeah, now that's working. And we've had COVID once since then. And neither time did I quite come down with it. I started to get it, but I was doing my preventatives and was able to, keep from actually coming down with a full infection. So the herbalist community had protocols for COVID from the start. So the whole emergency use authorization to me was out the window, just from my community.
Yeah. I've seen you mentioned Brett
Mhm.
Weinstein earlier. Um, I've seen him talking about vitamin D and how addressing vitamin D deficiency. Here's a quote from him: "It was the safest, healthiest, most effective countermeasure by far. Yet they closed the beaches and told us to stay inside. I don't know why their advice was upside down, but it was." And he delivered some of this before the Senate
Oh
recently,
yeah,
this testimony. And
we watched
being being someone on YouTube at that time, that was one of the big, because YouTube was constantly changing what you were allowed to speak about, what you weren't, and they were being very censorious, and you could get strikes. I had videos removed, just for asking questions. And one of the things they were doing which should strike everyone as immediately suspicious. Everyone. This is not a left or right thing. Was they were suddenly saying they were going to be taking down any videos talking about the benefits of vitamin C and vitamin D.
Anytime you see censorship, that is a red flag. Anytime you see them ramping up fear is a red flag. And that was our red flag back in 2020. Like February of 2020, we were like, they're up to something because they're trying to, oh my God, we're going to die, be afraid. We saw that and we're like, no, y'all are up to something. What are y'all
Doing.
and what are y'all doing? But it reminded me a little bit of 9/11 because everyone was very afraid and they did the Patriot Act, which
Yes.
wasn't the greatest thing.
Yes.
But because people were afraid, they're like, oh, it's for our safety. And I'm like, oh, I've seen this play before.
Yeah, once from the right and then this time from the left.
I think I'll just say sociopaths. Um, I think they switched camps
Yeah.
because it's the same looking behavior. What used to be over on one camp, you're now seeing on the other. And a lot of the people, from my old, left community, I haven't changed really anything I've done in terms of, where I stand and my philosophy. And I used to be in my community considered one of the most liberal people in my community. I'm now called far right. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you switched. You're now a conservative now. And I'm like, no. And it's not like I never had conservative values either. It's like family has always been incredibly important to me.
Mhm.
That's one of my core values. Um, Other philosophies I have would be considered very, very liberal. And
Same.
but the thing is, I'm watching people who used to be part of our local progressive community completely flip on their stances with a lot of things and then accuse everyone else of, turning. Like, I'm like, okay, so you've been staunchly non-GMO for decades, but now you want gene therapy, or my body, my choice, but now, mandates, no medical freedom.
Yeah. I think that started to wake the people who had a waking up moment, during the COVID policy years. I think it was because they could see that, and a lot of people couldn't see it, or they were part of it. They were the ones flipping and then calling everyone right wingers when they're the ones flipping. Um, I will say, you may have heard me say this on the show before, but I was really pleasantly surprised, when my husband and I got to visit Amsterdam this past year, and I met a lot of people who are progressives, and their waking up moment was seeing what happened with the COVID policy and what's happening to the farmers. And these are people who, they haven't changed position. They're staunchly anti-GMO, or they're skeptical of big pharma, and they're more into holistic medicine, the and they just could see the flip happening. Um,
Yeah. And the bullying.
yeah,
The bullying was, I have never been bullied so much in my life as I have been by the supposed compassionate community.
yeah,
And, you know, this is very sad for me because I have a lot of people, still hope I'm friends with who either turned a blind eye to it or went along with it. But here's where, I've seen all this before too, because I saw this, the root issue in my community. I saw that a long time coming,
mm,
around, the late 90s, um, the early 2000s. I started seeing behavior that I shouldn't have been seeing in the holistic health community. And part of that had to deal with, I have some cluster Bs in my life that I was having to deal with, which is
mm.
how I recognize uh, that behavior. I've had a couple of different types to deal with. Yay.
Same. Woohoo! It's a great club.
Yeah, now I know them. That's okay. But I was trying to confront some of those parties And in trying to do so, I wasn't trying to be mean. I wasn't trying to be uncaring or not understanding. But the approach you use with people with a conscience, like, well, you just have to understand and give them a chance, people learn. If you have a conscience, if you're a functional person, yes, that approach is good,
Yes.
but it does not work with a cluster B.
No, they take advantage of it.
Only exploited.
Yes.
So, yeah. And I was trying to explain to people, I've been trying to explain this for a long time to people, that there are certain characters that if you enable them, they will just get worse and the problem will keep growing. And they didn't want to hear that because that meant addressing a problem. And a lot of people they don't like confronting problems because they don't want to make people upset. They want to be nice. And
Mhm.
yeah, that would be great. I would love to just have everything nice and everyone get along also. But when there's a problem, especially of this kind, you have to confront it or it's going to get worse. Just
When
like,
you have predators. If you
yeah,
have a predator or a predatory ideology in your community, it will get worse. It's as long as it stays there. It's like I know exactly what you're talking about. Specifically within when you say you saw this in the 90s though, in that world, um,
yeah,
could you is it possibly be more specific about certain issues? Were there issues that
mm,
you were alerted to, or was it just problematic people and
it was everything.
yeah.
The ideology, uh, I saw grooming start a long time ago because
Mhm.
this is like the mindfulness community. We're talking about being mindful and dealing with our shadow self, dealing with our emotions, doing our emotional growth, emotional intelligence. um, this was that community. And one of the big things that got into that community was toxic positivity and the idea of just letting it go. Oh, it's like, oh, well, that's negative emotion. That's anger and depression. And you just need to let that go. Don't hold grudges, don't expect, a certain response from someone else. You're only in control of your own responses. So, you just have to let whatever it is go. Um, and that's kind of how manipulators work. They will take some truth. It's like, yes, you are responsible for
Your own
how
emotions.
you respond to a situation, but that doesn't mean you ignore the other party. And I saw that dynamic, the toxic positivity, which a lot of spiritual coaches and so forth were picking up, the whole let it go attitude. That was grooming. That was benefiting no one but bullies and predators. Because what that did was, just that's upsetting. Well, then just let it go. That meant you didn't learn that lesson. And every time you let it go and don't learn the lesson that's there, well, you're less and less able to recognize behaviors around you. You aren't picking up on what's going on. So,
Yes.
so I saw that as just enabling the particular parties who I was dealing with. Um, just I was constantly being told to just let it go, to just deal with myself. It's only upsetting you. And I'm like, really? It's only upsetting me? Uh, Gee, this is leading to the downfall of my family's business, which could have implications for our vendors and our community and our staff and everyone else, but it's only affecting me. I could start getting into some more personal uh, topics, but uh,
That's okay. I think what
I,
you're
I don't,
describing is you don't have to do that because, uh, you know, what you're describing is something that probably a lot of people listening recognize in in their own past experiences with people who take advantage of some of the ideas that are pushed in
yeah,
what we loosely call woke ideology. Um, and it's some of that it sounds to me, without you having to be specific though, it sounds to me like a case of, for example, when I look at the ways that ideology has spread into classrooms with kids and pushing the queer theory part of the belief system, one of the things they say is, if we have to do this for inclusivity, we have to introduce kids to these concepts for anti-bullying. And what's really kind of funny about that is that they are bullying and they are manipulating while saying that they're doing it to teach anti-bullying. You know what I
it,
mean?
it's Darvo, yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
where'd character development go?
Yeah.
Where's any mention of the aspects of character development that used to be the focus? It's kind of like with climate change. I
Mhm.
don't like that term because, whatever is causing changes in the weather, whether it's the sun, whether it's uh, human activity, it's still detached from what's going to actually be handling changes in weather. Because when was the last time you heard people talking about environmental degradation, about habitat loss, about pollution? I haven't heard people really talking about that at all. And oh, by the way, all your initiatives lately to deal with climate change are destroying the ecology. So how's
Yeah.
that taking care of the earth?
Right. How is
It's
that
a
holistic?
disconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, the philosophy of getting to the root of the issue, of actually considering what's going on and how it's connected, that has been taken away. And I think that the I'll just call it the let it go attitude, that was beneficial for the sociopaths to keep people from becoming mature enough and aware enough to recognize what was going on. It was like a gradual dumbing down, a regression of people so that they wouldn't notice and they would be compliant.
Mhm.
And I dealt with that for a long time, about people enabling. And several years ago, I was asked to give a little presentation to one of the local uh, mindfulness groups, meditation communities, and my what I talked about was how, you don't have to go on a mission trip to go, um, to Africa, to Indonesia, to do something that's very in the public eye, in a way, like a virtue signaling project, in order to help others. You're given an opportunity every day in your own life. It's put into your own life so that you have the opportunity to practice. It's like, oh, how would I, uh, address a problem? How would I confront a social issue? What do I do when I meet a bully? These are opportunities to practice. You have opportunities in your own life. And I was seeing so many people avoid dealing with those because they wanted the big pet issue to deal with. Um,
Jordan Peterson talks about this quite a bit. Is a lot of people in social justice, they do what you're saying. They focus on the big picture stuff rather than, cleaning their room, taking care
mhm.
of what they have control over. It's easier to say, I'm gonna be a climate change activist than to deal with the things you have control over.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the protest for whatever, where everyone can see me and I'm with my crowd, and we're waving our flags and having a great time. But what do I do with the bully right in front of me? How are you going to know how to handle any of the bullies in a more crisis situation if you haven't practiced with the small opportunities you have? And that's what I kept seeing. is that people weren't making use of their own opportunities. They were avoiding dealing with it. They were enabling it. I have seen the enabling has been one of the worst things. I really like Dr. Ramani's podcast because she talks about the issues, the problems with enabling, how to recognize the different types. There are a lot of people, I'm really grateful for some of the people who talk about these dynamics. Jerry Wise, Jake Wiskershin, I think
Oh,
also.
I love Jake. Yeah.
Yeah, he, I think, talked about that also. I'm so glad that there are a lot of people talking about this now because people need to recognize this.
Mm.
And perhaps realize how much they've been taken advantage of, because a lot of this grooming, you think you're doing something good. Conscientious people want to be helpful. They're told, like, don't you want to, do something to help this oppressed group, or, starving children, or whatever it is. And the way GMOs used to be marketed, it's like, you don't want children to go blind, do you? And you're a bad person if you don't want GMOs because you just want kids to go blind.
We
And
saw this during the COVID years. You're gonna
yeah,
kill grandma if you
that's
don't
a
do this.
tactic. That's a
Yeah.
tactic. Um, but the caring people, of course I want to help, and they're told what would be helpful, but the thing they should be doing is their own work to recognize, because if they haven't been doing that, they can be led and not recognize when they're doing the opposite of what is
Yeah.
promoted.
Yeah.
And like the trans, the gender ideology, that's not taking care of actual transsexuals. Buck Angel talks about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I know that there were people, on the right, on from a more conservative perspective, who for a long time were warning about, they approached it as, it's the gay agenda, they want to turn all the kids gay or whatever it is. But I knew that that's not the community this was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because the communication was a bit off, um, a lot of people, I think, didn't take the warning seriously, even though it was a real warning. But because it didn't seem to be clear, it wasn't clearly communicated. Because, for instance, I knew that this isn't, the whole gender ideology isn't coming from the gay community. The gay community has been very hurt by all this.
They're being used.
Yeah, yeah, they're being, uh, predators are masquerading as something they are not. And and again, we mentioned how it seemed like the sociopaths went from one camp to the other. Well, if you've been suspicious of one party because you saw their hypocrisy in the past, it takes a while to get trust back. And so when people were waking up, on the more conservative side, I think a lot of conservatives became much more balanced. I think it got so ridiculous that people were like, "Oh, we look a little out of control right now. Let's reground ourselves." I think a lot of people, checked themselves and became a little more balanced, because extremes either way are pretty similar. One cult
Mm-hmm.
is very like another.
Yeah.
Um, oh,
Can
you were
I?
going to say?
Oh, yeah. I was just gonna say, can I try and refocus this just a little bit on?
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I just, I, I kind of want to. I was wondering that, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, so you may not have these at your fingertips, but I was wondering if you could give us Jen's 10 tips for uh, physical, mental, emotional health in a chaotic world. Because a lot of people who watch this program and others, like some of the ones you've mentioned,
Mhm.
I think we're trying to find different ways to understand what's happening in the world around us, and like we can look at it through these different lenses. And at the end of the day, we're sometimes looking for like, hey, what are some takeaways of things that I can do. And so if you
Yeah,
have advice, I don't care if it's as simple as drink more water. But like, what are some of Jenn's takeaways for people?
get out in nature. That's one of the biggest ones is get out in nature. The wilder the nature, the better in a lot of cases. But just being outside where where there's intact ecology. That's because you're able to see what things look like in balance. That's one of the best ways to learn, and to ground yourself. So getting out in nature, um, engaging in nature, studying nature, because the more you understand the components of the ecology, like, oh, what kind of tree is that? What kind of bee is that? How does it live? If you understand a bit about their lives, the flora and the fauna, you better understand how to take care of it. And I think the practice of taking care of nature, being a nature steward, that is both very um, enlightening and very humbling.
Mhm.
And it helps to direct one to a good mindset with which to approach the world. And it helps to de-stress and the ground and to kind of recalibrate. So that's something I would say. Getting out in nature, taking care of nature, learning about nature.
By the way, from a Christian perspective, that's our original job. We are
Students,
stewards of nature. Yes.
yeah. And the spiritual practice, whatever name for God, the divine you have, that's in all of us. That's all inherent. And however you practice it, we all have access to that connection. And that's another thing that I would say is spend time in meditation of some kind, where you're not looking at devices, you're not distracted by things, just spend time in contemplation. That is a kind of prayer. Have communion with your inner dialogue, your intuition, connecting with your intuition
Yeah.
and learning to distinguish that from emotion. Those are not the same. And practice um, listening to and attuning to your intuition. That is very important because that is your channel to your spiritual connection.
Hmm.
And, sometimes I've heard people say, oh, well, you have to be, uh, careful because, spiritual influence, it will lead you astray. And I'm like, well, that takes emotional channels is what that hitches onto. Your intuition is not that. It's a pure channel, so to speak. And it,
Hmm.
it,
It's like a warning. When people talk about red flags, like a warning system, like,
yeah,
hey, pay attention here to
yeah,
something.
yeah. So learn to pay attention to your intuition and spend time in communion with it, because that's a way you can also learn to get answers. You can spend time, asking, why did this thing happen? Or what does this mean? And you can listen and you can become more and more adept at getting the insights, and for some people, it's given in concepts. For some people, it might be an actual, like almost like a character dialogue you have with yourself. But find a way that works with you. That's something I've had since I was a child, and I think that's something that has very much helped me.
Mm.
Uh, that and the nature connection. Uh, eat whole food that is appropriate for you. Pay attention to your body. Pay attention to how food sits with you. Both immediately and a few hours later, days later. Pay attention to how your diet makes you feel. Be active. Find some kind of activity. And if you're thinking, oh, I should exercise more, it doesn't take a whole lot. You can do, 20 push-ups a day, and that'll make a difference if you do it every day. It's the consistency. So find something that you enjoy doing, and it doesn't have to be like a whole routine. Just find something that you enjoy and do it daily.
Yes.
Um, and then also some kind of creative practice, because
Uh,
creativity, that is something that um, things without a conscience don't really do. They will try to exploit others who have that. They don't have that. So
Yeah.
creativity.
The knitters are going to love this. I
Yeah,
agree. I think it's a different part of your brain. It is a different part of your brain you're using entirely when you sit down and try to do anything creative, whether it's knitting or writing or music or painting or you do poetry, you do art.
I do. Well, I mean, a lot of the art behind me is, mine and my husband's and my daughter's. We're all artists. He's a musician also. I'm
Oh, wow.
an artist, a poet. One of the things I'm about to do at this time of year is, uh, ever since I was little, we would blow out eggs and have like the hollow eggshells.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know? And so we paint those. And that's one thing I do is I make little, here's one. I don't know. This is one that
It's
is, oh, I can,
beautiful.
oh, this
Oh,
is a camera for the kaiju. I don't know if you like monsters,
yeah, yeah.
the Japanese monsters, that's
Yeah.
Gamera. And I've got Mothra.
I love
And,
it.
I have a whole set. That's something I do. Just this one just has little stars on it. But I've collected those from, you know, years ago. That's something that from when my daughter was little, we would have our friends over and we would have, for different events, we would do creative projects together. Instead of, everyone always watching a movie or something, I would try and have an art project for all our birthday parties or seasonal
Yeah,
get togethers. We would have something creative to do. And
yeah.
those are memories. Those are special.
I love that. I'm glad you put that on the list. I have been playing with Hodgepodge lately. I
Oh,
guess that's
really?
what it's called, and I'm having so much fun. And yeah, because it also gives me an excuse to collect more junk jewelry for you for use in my creative endeavors. But yeah, it is fun. It's like you're making something out of all these different pieces, and when you're done, if it's not too terrible, it can go on the wall. And I highly recommend it to anybody who's like, I don't know if I could be creative. Hodgepodge, you can be creative. So
Gardening is a creative
gardening,
outlet, and again, that's being a steward. So those are all things. Education is a big thing. Educating about, your own health, reading. Oh gosh, reading books. This is something. I think stories. Stories are so important because stories help us develop our empathy. So, and that's
yeah,
different from watching a show. But reading a book helps you engage with each character, relate to each character. It puts yourself in a position that you wouldn't normally be in. It's like, oh gosh, what would it be like to be that character?
yeah,
And that's really important. Um, and this is kind of a tangent thought, going back to the holistic community kind of going awry, is the concept of yin and yang, the
mm,
masculine and the feminine, and so forth. Uh, well, within yin and the spectrum of yin and yang, you have incredible diversity. You don't need all these genders. You have everything within those components, because that's also, like just left brain, right brain, and we have both, and we learn to integrate the two. The creative side and the the numerical side, the rational side. And we need both, and they're supposed to be in balance, but it's a coordination between them. We all have masculine and feminine. I've
yeah,
got masculine, I've got feminine. And I think a lot of people who are confused right now are not familiar with the idea that you can have that we
mhm,
all have both those components. And, pick the balance that works for you, and it might change over time. That's another thing, that I witnessed, is I think, because I have some personal experience with the topic of trans. with my family, and everyone I have seen who has been participating in that has, and again, my observation, just my personal observation, everyone came from profound dysfunction. I
Mhm.
don't know a single person who came from a good situation, and they did not have good grounding. They did not have good examples. And some of them seem to think that the only way they can be strong, these are girls, is to be a man. Like,
Yeah.
there are strong women in the world. And in fact, this is a group that, are you familiar with Hayao Miyazaki? Um,
No, I don't think
my
so.
neighbor, my neighbor Totoro.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. So that director, his stories, I'm not huge into all the anime except specific genres, and his movies, because of the story, the characters. Um, I was 9 years old when I first saw Naushka of the Valley of the Wind, and that story, that character, the heroine in that story, was like, that's who I want to be like. I didn't want to dress like her. I wanted to be like her. I wanted to develop myself to have that kind of courage and integrity and compassion. And this is a group of kids who grew up watching these shows. And I'm like, y'all have the character examples you need. Y'all know that there are strong women characters in the world. Why aren't you paying attention? It's like it became superficial. It became about the labels and not about what's inside.
Yeah.
Where'd the story go?
Yeah.
And this is very painful for me, because my daughter hasn't spoken to me for over a year, partly because of this.
Wow.
And, I already had to deal with being uh, separated in ways from her, dealing with indoctrination with other parties in the past that were alienating towards me. I've dealt with cluster bees. I've dealt with some very difficult people, and more than one. And had my daughter turned against me years ago, and we were finally repairing our relationship, and then this happened, COVID and everything else, all the woke,
All the
and
way.
it went against all our ideology, everything that we'd been practicing and I set the examples of. I will say this, though, that sometimes if people want to rebel, not necessarily saying that's what's going on, but when people want to rebel, they will lash out at the people they feel safest with, because
Yes.
they don't want to confront the bullies.
Yeah. I'm really sorry to hear that, Jennifer, and, I'll tell you, I've received so many messages from people who are going through something similar, because being alienated from loved ones who because of this belief system or because of the madness happening in society right now, and I just I feel for you, and, if it's any what I'm not sure usually what to say to people other than it's sometimes they'll have specific questions for me, and what I'll usually say is, "Look, I was in that belief system for 20 years, and I came out of it, and I'm sure there were people who thought I never would." My aunt, we were alienated from one another, and I found out after the fact that she had prayed for me, like, those whole 2 decades. And I found my name in her prayer closet. I found note cards with specific prayers, which really touched me. Like,
You
you
don't
know,
give up on the people you love.
yeah. And so I will sometimes offer that as an example that, even when it seems hopeless, my aunt didn't give up on me. And it took forever. It took a long time, but I left it. I think people can leave it, and so I don't know all the specifics, but I'm sorry to hear that. Um,
Well, everything before has prepared me for this. I mean,
yeah,
I've dealt with a lot over the years, and I'm like, well, I'm prepared now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's lately as a like growing in me, I became a Christian a few years ago and understanding trying to understand God better and that the walk that I think God is asking us to do with him has helped me to start to view things in that way of like, oh, okay, this has prepared me for this thing and this is preparing me for this. And there's a whole chapter in Hebrews. My pastor at one point told me I should read and memorize. It was Hebrews 12, and it's all about that discipline in life, like viewing trials as discipline to make you stronger for the dealing with then something else down the road. And so that's that. I don't know if that makes sense,
Oh yeah. I
but
mean,
yeah,
that's why I don't like the let it go thing, because you're missing all those opportunities to do the character building to be able to handle everything later, and I
yeah,
think that's people are going to have to do the work still.
yeah.
Yeah.
Not to
Um,
borrow one of their phrases, do the work. I'm kidding.
do the work. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like set the example. That's also something in customer service that, I was mindful of. You might have just a few moments to interact with someone. That might be the first time they've been into a health store. They might be leery of, what's all this herb stuff, but use every moment to make an impression. You're sowing seeds with every interaction. So make it good.
Yeah.
Use every opportunity, set a good example. Your example is often the best medicine you could offer someone.
100% agree with this. You shall know them by their fruits and how they behave. Yes, 100% agree. Well, I want to thank you for being here today. As you mentioned, we could probably talk to you again in the future and go down different specific avenues, which
We
is,
didn't get to all the seed oil stuff.
I know, the wealth of information.
It's a huge topic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, so I'd love to have you back sometime.
I would
Just
love to.
thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom with us, Jennifer. And if people want to find you online, I know you don't have a website, but you're on social media and
I'm
you're
on social
often in the
media.
chat here.
Yeah, and actually, I see my name, the Tep Art Jen.
Hmm.
That's my husband is Tep Art. That's his company website. So he's a graphic designer and
Okay.
musician. So he does. I'm not sure which site that'll go to, but you can find him through that also.
Cool. Well, I have a feeling we're going to meet in person eventually. So
Maybe at uh, the herb event at Round Top.
maybe so. Yeah, you sent me something of that.
You,
Very
you need
cool.
to see that place anyway. It's really, really lovely. Anyone who's in the area, I suggest going to Festival Hill at Round Top.
I've been to Round Top, not for an herb event. I've been there twice. Once
Festival
I was,
Hill is a different place.
oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
Never mind.
that's the Music Institute.
Mm.
Yeah, and they have gardens, they have a whole grounds, you can spend the day, and I'm looking, there's going to be a plant sale there, so of course I'm going to go.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for hanging out here.
You.
Thanks for hanging out here at Deprogrammed. And if you guys are watching this interview, please consider hitting like if you liked it. Leave a comment below. That helps our channel grow. And appreciate you guys hanging out with us tonight. I hope you have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Keri.